I found out my wife had been cheating for 2 years. I said nothing and watched her plan the perfect life she was building with someone else. Then I made one phone call that changed everything. I want to be precise about the moment I found out, because I've replayed it so many times that the details had become almost sacred to me. The specific texture of that Tuesday evening in April, the way the light came through the kitchen window at a low angle and made everything look softer than it was. My wife, Melissa, had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she went to pick up our daughter from soccer practice. She did this sometimes, left it open, unlocked, running. She was not, in most respects, a careless person, but she had grown comfortable. That is the word I keep returning to. Comfortable. She had been doing this for long enough that the vigilance had worn smooth. I was not snooping. I want to be clear about that. Not because it changes anything morally, but because it is true. I was walking past the counter to get a glass of water when I saw the name on the screen. The email application was open. The name in the subject line of the most recent message was Marcus, and the subject line itself read, "Can't stop thinking about last weekend." I stopped. I read. I am a fast reader, and I covered the visible portion of that email in about 4 seconds. It was enough. I put my glass of water down very carefully. I walked to the living room. I sat in the armchair by the window, my armchair, the one Melissa always said was ugly and I'd kept anyway, and I sat there for the approximately 22 minutes it took for her car to pull into the driveway. When she came in, I was in the kitchen. I had made dinner. She kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was, and I told her it had been fine, which was, at that moment, the most remarkable lie I had ever told. That was April. My daughter, Brianna, was 11 years old. My name is Daniel. I was 38, worked as a civil engineer for a municipal contractor outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and had been married to Melissa for 12 years. I did not confront her that night, or the next, or the week after. Here is what I did instead. I thought. I am, by temperament and profession, a person who does not act until he understands the full scope of what he's dealing with. You do not build a bridge by reacting. You survey the terrain first. You understand the loads, the stresses, the points of failure. You plan. I opened a separate email account on my work computer. I contacted a private investigator, a woman named Cheryl who operated out of a small office in Brentwood, and I hired her for a month. I told her what I knew and what I needed to know. She was professional, thorough, and entirely without judgment. At the end of the month, she handed me a manila envelope that I sat with in my car in a parking garage for 30 minutes before I opened it. Marcus was 41. He was a commercial real estate broker. He was, by every available metric, attractive and financially successful, and deeply, deeply married to a woman named Sandra, with whom he had 3 children ages 8, 11, and 14. He and Melissa had met at a work conference in Atlanta 2 years prior. They saw each other, according to Cheryl's findings, approximately once a month. They communicated daily. They had, in the months before I found out, begun discussing the possibility of both leaving their respective marriages. That last part is what changed the nature of my anger, because I had been holding, somewhere beneath the cold surface of my planning, a small and irrational hope that this was something frivolous, something that had grown at an accident and meant less than it appeared. The documents in that envelope dismantled that hope thoroughly. This was not an accident. This was a project. They were building something, the two of them, and my daughter and I were obstacles in the blueprint. I put the envelope in the lockbox in my home office, and I continued to say nothing. I want to try to explain that decision, because I know how it sounds. It sounds calculating, even cruel, and maybe it was in some degree, but here is the truth of it. I had a daughter. Brianna was in 6th grade, doing well in school, happy in the specific, unself-conscious way that children are happy when their world is stable. I was not willing to blow up her stability based on incomplete information and raw emotion. I needed to be ready, financially ready, legally ready, emotionally ready, before I moved. A surprise confrontation would give Melissa the initiative. She would control the narrative. She would have time to position herself while I was still bleeding. I spoke, in strict confidence, to a divorce attorney in March, a man named Porter who had been recommended to me by a colleague at work. I spent 3 months in consultations. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, which meant the division of assets would be based on a range of factors, including length of marriage, economic contributions, and, crucially, fault. Tennessee is one of the states where adultery can be considered in divorce proceedings. I was building a case the way I would build anything else, carefully, load-bearing element by load-bearing element. During all of this, I watched Melissa live her life. I watched her make dinner and laugh at television shows, and argue gently with Brianna about screen time, and kiss me goodnight with a consistency that I found, the longer it went on, less infuriating and more profoundly sad. She was not a monster. I had to keep reminding myself of that, not to excuse her, but to stay accurate. She was a person who had made a series of choices, each one probably feeling smaller than it was, until she had arrived somewhere she couldn't see a way back from. I understood the mechanism of it, even as I found it unforgivable. In June, 14 months after I first saw that email, I was ready. The phone call I made was not to Melissa. It was to Sandra. I had debated this decision more than any other in the process. Sandra had not wronged me. She was, in the most direct sense, a victim in the same way I was. But she was also, I had come to believe, someone who had a right to the same information I had been carrying alone for over a year. What she did with it was her business, but to leave her in the dark, to walk away with my own settlement secured while Marcus quietly prepared his departure on a timeline of his choosing, felt like a cruelty I wasn't willing to participate in. I called her on a Thursday afternoon. I told her my name. I told her I was married to Melissa. I told her as plainly and factually as I could what I knew and how long I'd known it. She was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was very controlled, the way voices get when a person is holding something enormous at arm's length through sheer will. She asked me if I had documentation. I told her I did. I told her I would share it with her attorney if she wanted.
She said, "Thank you, Daniel," and then she hung up. I called Melissa into the living room that evening after Brianna was asleep. I told her and knew. I told her I had known for 14 months. I placed the envelope from Cheryl on the coffee table between us. I told her that I had retained a divorce attorney and that she would be hearing from him, and that I had already spoken with Sandra. The color left her face in a way I had never seen before, a kind of total draining, like a tide going out at speed. She started to speak 3 times and stopped each time. Finally, she said, "How long have you—" And I told her again, 14 months. She asked me why I hadn't said anything. I told her that I needed to be ready. She asked what that meant. I told her it meant that I had loved her and that loving someone does not mean handing them the tools to hurt you a second time. She cried. I did not. I had used up whatever crying I had in me during those 14 months, in the car mostly, in parking lots, in the 15 minutes after Brianna went to sleep when I allowed myself to feel the full weight of it before putting it back down and continuing. The divorce took 8 months. Porter was excellent. The adultery, documented, affected the asset division. I kept the house. Brianna lives primarily with me, with Melissa having regular visitation. Brianna was told, in age-appropriate terms, that her parents had grown apart, a fiction I have no intention of complicating until she is old enough to request the truth. Marcus and Sandra divorced as well. Whether he and Melissa continued their relationship after everything collapsed, I genuinely don't know and have worked hard to stop caring about. What I can tell you is this. There is a version of that April evening that I sometimes revisit, the version where I hear the car in the driveway and I storm out and say everything right then, raw and ruined. I understand why people do that. The release of it must be enormous. But I also know that version ends with me losing the house, losing the primary custody arrangement, losing the financial position I spent 12 years building, because shock and grief are not a strategy. I'm not saying the way I handled it was emotionally healthy. I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure 14 months of silent, methodical preparation while sleeping next to someone who is betraying you costs something that hasn't finished collecting yet. My therapist, whom I started seeing in January of that year and still see now, has many thoughts on this, most of which I am still working through. But my daughter is stable. She is doing well in school. She has 2 parents who, in separate houses, are doing their best. And she lives in the house she grew up in, with her room unchanged, with her dog, with her routines intact. I made a promise to myself in that armchair in the 22 minutes before Melissa's car pulled in. I promised myself that whatever happened next, Brianna would not pay the price for decisions she didn't make. I have kept that promise. Everything else, the grief, the anger, the long, strange process of dismantling a life I thought I understood, that I'm still working on. But the promise I kept, and on the nights when nothing else feels settled, that is the thing I hold on to.